Hello everyone, my name is Akshay Kumar Dattatre Bhagat and today is 17th of May 2022 and it's my original video. So our today's topic is exception in Java. So basically what is meant by exception? Exception is an unconditional situation in which our program or code gets terminated in between or stop an execution or the further part has been not executed. So this is known as exception, means an abrupt condition in which our program gets terminated. So basically, parent class of the exception is an throwable. Then the exception, and there are different types of exception. Suppose we will classify exception. There is check the exception, uncheck the exception, and error. So basically, these three are the main types of the exception. Then again, in deep, we will see in further deep classification. Then there is an arithmetic exception, null point exception, string out of bound exception, index out of bound exception. Um, these all are actually classification of an exception. So we will see one by one. So what is meant by arithmetic exception? Suppose if we are doing an arithmetic equation and our actually our answer goes to infinite, then this is in Java programming. This is not acceptable. The loop should stop somewhere. Means our answer should be stopped somewhere. So this condition we cannot give when to stop. So that's why in Java we are getting as an arithmetic exception. Then again, the next one is an string index out of bound exception. Suppose we are working with an string, and at that time, suppose our length of this string is an 5, and suppose we try to access more than 5 index, then it will give string index out of bound exception. Then again, the next one is an array index out of bound. So what is this exception? In this exception, basically, if we'll means if we'll our array size is 5, and suppose we'll try to access more than 5, at that time it will show index out of bound exception. So these are the exception, basic exception which arises. So this is not our problem. This exception will arise. But how to overcome this exception? So for these scenarios, we are having and different methods. So exception is handled in basically in try and catch block. So what is a try and catch block? So whatever we are having and risky code or risky program that we give in try block. So in try block, suppose we are facing an index out of bound exception or arithmetic exception or a string index out of bound exception or null point exception, then all this which the programmer face like this can arise an exception. So that risky code has been written in our try block, and that exception actually when the program gets executed in then the our when the our exception line comes, at that time it suppose our exception comes, at that time that exception asks the JVM whether we have catched the exception or not. Suppose then it looks for forward if it is catched. If it is not catched, then it will throw an exception. And if the exception has been catched, then it will execute the catch block. So what is meant by catch block? Suppose we are having an arithmetic exception or any other exception, then in catch block we catch that exception, that type of exception, and we create object of that exception. And in catch block we give an statement or simply print our print our print our whatever we are exception arising, or whatever we have to execute the further execution. Like this we can catch the exception. So because of this exception, handled exception, we our code or program doesn't terminate in between. Then there is another and finally block. So what this finally block is made for? Suppose we are having an program, and in our program we are having one means we are having one statement, and whatever the case it will be, the exception is handled or not handled, but the programmer point of view should that it should be the final that statement should be clearly executed. So at this scenario in this scenario, whatever like this execution means whatever we want to execute, that we are writing in our finally block, that will get executed whether our exception is handled or not, but this finally block will get executed. And then we cannot write only try block alone. We have to write try block with catch block, then only the exception is handled. Then again, it not compulsory to write the catch block. It will write try and finally block. At that time also, the exception is handled. Then the next one is an we will see the checked and unchecked exception. So in checked exception, the exception which is checked at the compile time is known as checked exception. So while doing the program, or doing the development, at that time we will see or look into the program, where we feel like we are suppose in this case we can face an exception. At that time we can write there that risky code into an try and catch block. So that is meant by checked exception. And the exception which arises during our runtime, that is known as unchecked exception. Then again the next one is an error. The error is caused due to, as there are different scenarios when our system get crashed, or when our operating system get crashed, when our power goes down, or like this in like these scenarios where we cannot control it by program or exception. These scenarios, what is terminating the termination, that is called as an error. So basically this is all about the exception in Java. Thank you.